Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm Mark Stein, Thrive founder and your podcast host. We're creating sustainable, inclusive, and multi-generational residential communities from repurposed big box stores or other unused buildings. By offering unique and ecological co-living options, our aim is to combat the epidemic of isolation, revitalize communities, and help others discover the many benefits of engaged community living. In this podcast series, join us as we discuss co-living and other aspects of our concept, in addition to bringing you interesting people who are doing cool things from around the world. Through this podcast, learn more about our concept and see how Thrive co-living communities will bring together people from all walks of life. To find more about us, visit www.thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thanks for watching and enjoy the podcast. So hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm pleased to have one of our few return visitors, Connor Moore, here today. He is a co-living consultant and huge cheerleader, researcher, thinker. I hate thought leader, by the way. I hate that term, thought leader. I want to be a doing leader, not a thought leader.
I like
but anyway,
that.
So always happy to chat with Connor. We both are thinking co-living when we're in the shower, when we're doing, not together, but when we're individually, when we're out doing exercise, we're always thinking it. So I love talking with him about what's on his mind and what's going on. So first of all, you've relocated since we last talked. So fill us in on where you are and what you're up to.
Sure. Yeah. First off, yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me back on, Mark. As you were just mentioning, absolutely love all of our conversations. The wheels are always turning, I think, for both of us on the co-living, shared living front. So I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. But yes, as you mentioned as well, so just moved down and joined you actually down here in Florida. So I'm a bit south of St. Pete, but I am down in Miami. So just recently, Nomos Group, which is the company that I'm working for right now, we moved our official headquarters down to Miami. We're in a co-working place down here in Coconut Grove, and I actually moved to the more kind of urban area in Brickell, but slowly getting acquainted to all of the real estate happenings down here in South Florida, and it is certainly one of the biggest industries. There's a lot going on. Miami is certainly going, I think, through some kind of boom period, I think, especially over the past few years. So it's been good to be in the middle of it all and obviously enjoy the Florida sun. So no complaints from me on the move.
It beats the heck out of being in New York weather-wise, I'm sure.
That's for sure. I think, January, February, March, there's probably not many better places to be in the US than Miami. So all is well.
Nice. And you still continue your involvements, your consulting with the co-living in New York. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the hats that I wear is a associate role at Nomos Group. So right now it's my boss and I, Stonington Cox and myself. We're potentially looking to hire somebody at some point along this year. So feel free to reach out if you might be interested. A little plug there. But yeah, so our main cornerstone client, which is out of New York, as you mentioned, Six Peak Capital. We are continuing to work with them. They have been a phenomenal group of guys to work with. They were actually just down here in Miami on a little kind of a 2022 kickoff meeting, and we said, "Oh, we'll come up to New York," and they said, "Oh, it's 13 degrees up here. We're going to fly down to Miami for the meeting." So we were happy to host them down here. But I guess the most recent update on that, I guess last time I was on the podcast, I think I probably mentioned that we were looking to raise for their co-living Los Angeles development pipeline in in, I guess, most of 2022, or most of 2021 rather. And so I am pleased to say that I guess it was about September or October, 6P Capital was able to partner with a private equity real estate company, and they were able to raise the funds for their 4 main buildings in Los Angeles. So we were very excited that when we went out to the markets, kind of starting in March 2021, there started to be a lot more activity, a lot more reception to co-living in general. As folks were saying, okay, we're in a post-vaccine world. People are returning to urban centers. People are kind of back onto the kind of being confident about urban real estate. And so we were certainly excited, very excited for them that they have kind of since kind of closed that funding round. And now, as usual, we're on to the next one. So now we're kind of looking at a few different other projects around the country, and we'll be helping them kind of advise on some of the financial structures of what those could look like, and then introduce them to some investors to hopefully get some funding for some more co-living buildings. So per usual on that front, we're going out to the financial capital markets and kind of banging the co-living drum, if you will. So it's been a lot of fun, and I've been learning a lot.
So dig a little underneath the surface on that, on what it's like to go to the markets to get money for co-living. What's their reaction, and not just to COVID, although I would like to talk about where we are in co-living in regards to COVID. But just talk about what that's like. What kind of sell is that? What's the reception of people with money towards co-living? What's their awareness? So just fill us in a little bit about that.
Sure. No, it's something that over the past few years, as we've kind of gone and had the first meeting, and then the second meeting, and then the third meeting, and I think it's something that real estate investors, for very good reason, are risk averse, right? If we're talking about investing in the stock market, or now that I'm down here in Miami, in cryptocurrencies or the rest of it, there's a level of risk that a lot of investors are comfortable with, right? But a lot of the largest real estate investors in the U.S. are, their pension funds, their teacher retirement systems, their, state employee, funds out of California or Texas or New York, some of the biggest states. And they're looking to put a lot of capital to work, but that is not going to go to zero, right? So if you have a bunch of state employees' retirement funds, you obviously want something that can grow slowly, but you're confident in the growth, right? And so real assets, right? So actual real estate, no matter what, a plot of land in a building in a urban core in Los Angeles or San Francisco or Miami or New York is never going to go to zero, right? Maybe rents will go up and down and the rest of it, but it's definitely seen as more of a safe investment. And so when we go to a lot of these investors that have had success over the long term of kind of investing in the very traditional apartments that are in downtown urban centers and just watching it, kind of slowly rent grow, and therefore the value of their underlying asset grow kind of slowly. It's tough for them to fully wrap their minds around, oh, there's this completely new concept. People want to live in a better way in the 21st century, and here's how we're going to do it, right? And it makes sense that their kind of knee-jerk reaction to almost anything new is, whoa, wait a minute. We've never underwritten this. We've never had models. We want, 10 years of how this is performed in the market. And really it makes sense in real estate, right? So, back, 20 years ago when student housing was really kind of coming onto the scene, and senior housing, and even industrial, or nowadays life sciences is kind of the hot, kind of sub real estate asset class. A lot of those first reactions from investors are, we don't fully understand it. We want to see more data. We want to see it executed at scale. And we want to make sure that it works, right? Before we write a check for, $50 million or $100 million, and we're investing the funds of, public employees from a state or even a federal program, of course, they want to make sure that it's going to work, right? And so while it can be frustrating that, we don't, hand a sheet about co-living to someone and they say, where do we sign? Here's money, we're going to throw it at you. It certainly makes sense that it does take this longer period to educate investors. So to kind of wrap up the thought here, I think that it has been a long educational process. We've been at it for probably over 18 months now, just kind of going out to some of these larger groups. But luckily, it's been around for long enough. There's starting to be some bigger groups that are seeing, okay, call it co-living, call it, 21st century high density urban residential. There's a lot of different terms you can call it. But I think a lot of the larger groups, after we've gone to them many and many times, and they've seen how some of these assets have performed, and they have more data on, okay, co-living does work. A lot of them are starting to warm up to our conversations, which has been obviously music to our ears as we go to folks, the third and the fourth time, and they say, oh, these are the co-living guys here again. Let's see what new data they have, new projects. But it's certainly been exciting to kind of see a lot of those conversations that we were starting to have a year and a half or 2 years ago. Some of the most forefront investors in the space start to warm up and start to kind of, hopefully we're like close to some of the big ones giving a thumbs up and seeing a lot of funds come into the space.
So let's bring COVID into it. And, certainly with our education and fundraising, it's not been, I've not missed the irony of promoting a co-living concept in the middle of a pandemic. Although our concept would have held up beautifully because it involves separate entrances. So people who were sheltering in place and not going out could collaborate and be together. And then those who were going out could isolate and as needed. So ours would have held up, but it's still not intuitive. So the way I see it at this point is that in general, with some hotspots as exceptions, I think people are learning to live with this. They're learning to adapt. The Omicron, I think, threw a wrench in where we thought it was heading, which was more stable. But I think even with that, I think people, because the infections have not been as bad, the reactions, the hospitalizations, the deaths, although significant, it's not been as bad as it could be. And people are saying, hey, we could be on our way out of this because of these factors. So my guess is, and I'd like to hear from you, is that because in general, we're learning to live with this and to protect ourselves, that there's not a knee-jerk rejection of the concept and laughing you out of the office. They're going, okay, now we see how it might be able to work in the short term. Is that where we are? And how do you see the current status?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to say it, Mark. I think kind of from a 30,000 kind of foot view, I think a lot of the like most large events, there's pros and cons, right? I think obviously a lot of the cons from the global pandemic are very apparent and very obvious. And I think that kind of knee-jerk reaction to the fact that you'd say, hey, we're trying to bring people together. We're trying to, kind of bring them together and have face-to-face interactions, and we want to, create this co-living community environment. And people say, well, wait, that is the opposite of social distancing, literally the opposite, right? So there was that kind of, first few months after, or, really first kind of, maybe 6 to 12 months, kind of after March 2020, where people were like, almost like, get out of the room. Like, what are you talking about co-living right now? Like, this is wild. I think exactly like you were saying, Mark, kind of like, as we've become more comfortable with it, as it's kind of stretched on, we just have to learn to live with it, right? And I think that's when folks have said, okay, like, obviously, this isn't going to last forever. It's something that we'll, eventually just have to live with and deal with, kind of like, past pandemics have been. But I think that people are realizing that, yes, of course, people are going to go back to some kind of, quote, normal, whatever that may be, like city, urban environments. But I think on the flip side, some of the pros from from, the general pandemic has been people's, kind of more rapid pace of adapting to change, right? I think like obviously a lot of these work from home, work from anywhere trends would not have been nearly as advanced as they are without the past 2 years, right? I think that, the fact that, we've met many, many times all over Zoom, these are technologies that were not as advanced, as they are now because of the pandemic, right? Like a lot of cities, a lot of, kind of local governments are, coming up with new strategies that say, okay, if people don't need to be in the office 5 days a week, maybe they can live, a bit further out from the city, right? And then relooking at public transport. And if you do build a new building, let's build some co-working spaces in there, right? And so I think that a lot of the pros from the pandemic has been a lot of either, individuals, people that are looking to live in new places, city governments that are making housing policies, real estate developers who are building buildings, all have been forced to think about living in a new way, which co-living, like really when you boil it down to it, is just that, right? It's saying, hey, people want to live in a new way, in the 21st century, and co-living is going to respond to those wants and needs, right? And so a massive, massive benefit for the industry, obviously with some growing pains, but has been that a lot of folks really all across the board, across all those different verticals, investors, developers, asset owners, city planners, and the actual tenants themselves have been forced, by no choice of their own, have been forced to think differently about how people live. Which if you say, what's one of the things that could advance co-living the quickest, it would be that mindset shift, right? And so I think that hopefully as we, kind of continue after this wave, and I've stopped trying to predict that, oh, this is the last wave, or, oh, it's gonna, we'll just kind of see where it all shakes out and where it all goes. But certainly there's some kind of end in sight before the end of the decade. I'm knocking on wood over here, but I think that as we kind of come out the other side, that mindset shift of, oh, I'm already thinking about where I live in a different way. I'm thinking about how I work in a different way. I'm thinking about, the entire kind of urban living experience in a different way. And I think that will only add to this wave of folks, kind of hopping on board the co-living train, if you will. And so I think that while we've certainly had some growing pains over the past few years, it's been tough to chat with investors when you're pitching something that's the opposite of social distancing. There's certainly been some, consolidation in the industry, some operators that have failed or their business model has proved not to kind of withstand COVID. But I think that as we kind of crawl out the other side of this, I'm still extremely, extremely bullish on co-living. And I think that being connected to a lot of the investors that are starting to look at co-living, I can honestly say that a lot of them are starting to come around to it after we've been kind of pounding the table over the past 12 or 18 months. So maybe per usual, remain optimistic on co-living despite the pandemic and everything. But that's at least a little bit where I see it moving forward.
Plus, it doesn't hurt to have all this pain in the real estate market with office vacancies and vacancies of all types to help investors and developers think about different uses for buildings. They just have to. So
100%.
I think that's going to help us in the short run and long run. Let me ask you this. So I'm an investor, but I'm mainly an investor in Tesla. So I'm a high risk, high reward investor. And like you say, real estate investors do not tend to be that way. And so I'd like to get your insights on taking a concept that I think by its nature is progressive, and progressive people who don't think like real estate investors embrace. So you take this concept that's embraced by one group, if I'm being fair, and I think generally I probably am. I'm sure there are some exceptions, and then asking for money from this group that is risk averse. They want to see the numbers. Put it in my hot little hand. So how does that go? And are they moving towards us?
It's a great question, and I'm very, very glad you mentioned this, Mark. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I think the kind of the like different hats that I wear in the co-living industry kind of position me kind of at the middle of some of these parties where it's like, okay, chatting with the real estate investors that are not to be stereotypical, but are the like belt and suspenders type, where's the suit, works in Midtown Manhattan or whatever it might be, right? I think that and then there's the other crowd, right? Which with my work through CoLive, which is the like nonprofit out of Europe that I've been working with for the past 2 years as kind of head of content to help them, put some more co-living research out there. We've hosted some, kind of global summits to kind of get the co-living industry together. But that crowd has mostly been the kind of community builders, right? It's the folks that at a small level love co-living for a lot of the reasons that I love co-living and got into it in the first place is because it can bring people together. It can benefit their lives. It's a better way to live in the 21st century. And I really think that it can, kind of build a lot of meaningful relationships and be just what individuals, communities, and, larger countries and societies need post 2020. That's my little pitch there on that side. But I think that where I've kind of positioned myself almost, by accident or on purpose, who knows, but is kind of as a translator between these two crowds, right? The ones you just mentioned, Mark, was kind of the co-living folks that, think of it as the community and the, positive social benefits are a lot of what drives them. Founders like yourself that get, really, really excited about the fact that, hey, we can have this, multi-generational co-living and improve the way people live, provide kind of everything there for them in one spot, which we need. We need those visionaries. We need those folks that think in that way. But it can be a little tricky when those people who have their own language, right? They speak the language of social returns and impact and, all of those kinds of things to speak their language. And then there's an entire another language of real estate investors, right? And so at Nomos Group, we certainly kind of try to act as the bridge between, hey, we have an ear on the ground of all these co-living operators and what they're doing. I have like a research blog that I've been keeping up for a while. And so, we're kind of, for lack of a better term, thought leaders or like researchers in the space. But then as well are able to speak the language of investors, right? And so a lot of the co-living operators don't speak the language of unlevered yield on cost or, a 10-year IRR or, all of these things that for real estate investors, this is their bread and butter. When they hear about a potential investment, they want to know, how much is the equity check? What is the, loan to cost? Where's the construction debt coming from? Where is it located? What are the market fundamentals there? And so we at Nomos Group try to act as a kind of a bridge between the two, right? And so what it takes is almost just being a translator. So it's saying, okay, here's the co-living industry. Here's what they talk about. Here's what gets them going. They want to have a tech-enabled, 21st century living platform that provides a better living experience for their customers, for their tenants, for their members, right? And then we try to go and we say to the real estate investors, hey guys, when you speak this language, what this translates to is higher occupancy rates. What it translates to is higher brand loyalty, which can then have a higher brand value for the actual operating company, for the opco, right? And so basically it's trying to tell the story in one language, but convert it into the language of investors, which obviously is a very tricky process. But I think that, kind of as more folks kind of, to go back to what I mentioned earlier, as more folks kind of hop on the co-living train, a lot of these, kind of terminologies or, kind of different languages will kind of like start to coalesce. There's a lot of folks, as I mentioned earlier, that, are calling co-living, more high density urban residential, which if you're a real estate investor, when you hear that, I think you're more like, oh, okay, this is what this is, right? It's kind of, modern living, but with this spin of, maybe tech enabled, but or like providing shorter leases, the flexibility, the affordability, the the better living experience, but you have to speak it in their language, right? And so for me, I'm kind of like, I don't really care what we call it. I personally like the co-living term because I think it gets down to that communal aspect of the living model that I think is absolutely foundational. But if real estate investors will only invest in it by calling it, high density urban residential, I'll call it that, no problem, right? So I think that
I'll call it a pig.
kind of, yeah, exactly, right. So as long as it's still, something close to, the kind of, something that can have higher financial returns while also having higher societal and environmental returns as well. Sign me up, and I'll call it anything you want. But I think kind of positioning ourselves as translators to hopefully build that trust bridge between investors and the kind of the more traditional co-living environment is something that I certainly see as a worthy pursuit. It's something over the next few years that I hope to focus on, and hopefully with a little bit of luck, we can have some more success.
Do you see some examples yet? We're still new. I wouldn't say it's infancy or early infancy, but we're probably not in an adolescent stage yet, co-living. Do you see any examples? And let me just share my concerns. And it probably is of all co-living. I'll call myself a purist, or certainly a communalist, maybe, where the emphasis is on community and community building. I think my concern, and probably others that think similarly, is when you introduce the profit motive, will that squeeze out everything that we value in terms of building community? All those soft items, can those two worlds coexist? And are you seeing some examples where real estate investors and developers are getting together and they're working together with the community builder types to have regular programming, and not just, hey, let's have a beer out in the lobby, but regular programming and initiatives, and seeing the community take the initiative to come up with events and activities, and not just be a traditional renter who says, what have you done for me lately? So have you, long-winded question, but are you seeing some examples where this can work and the things that we in the co-living community value can still coexist and make money for the investors?
Yes, Mark. This is I'm again so glad you asked this one. I think this is a foundational, kind of topic, issue, challenge. I think for the entire co-living industry, at least until 2030, kind of like as we grow and kind of define exactly what co-living is and what it's meant to be and where it's going to go. This is something that is extremely important. So important that I wrote one kind of article on this, and I called it Co-Living's Dilemma, Scalability versus Community. And one of my good friends, Perjury, actually just released his book. Little plug for a friend here. Just released his book, Art of Co, that is around 300 pages of this exact issue of, you want it to be financially scalable because you want to reach as many folks as possible, right? Like, it'd be great if I could open up a co-living that has 5 people in a house, and I can have an excellent impact on their life, right? Like, there's nothing short of amazing about that. But I'd rather have an impact on 500 people's lives, or 5,000, or 5 million, around the world, right? And so there is this balance between, scalability, and by that there's partially that means like financial profitability, right? Where it says, hey, this is a great thing to go after. Therefore, we're going to get a lot of investment and bring this idea to millions, or potentially 1 billion people, right? And so I think that there is that aspect. And on the other side, there's the social elements, there's the environmental elements, kind of from shared resources, from getting energy from the right sources, and then there's the social elements of having these meaningful conversations, as you mentioned, Mark, not just grabbing the beer, not just having the movie night on a Thursday, but having these, intentional discussions, purpose-driven communities that are really about finding a better way to live, and having that kind of personal and professional growth. The short answer is I have not seen anyone do it at scale yet, right? So I have seen phenomenal communities kind of as I was traveling around the world of co-living pre-pandemic. I saw amazing co-living communities that were small, right? That had, 10 people in a co-living spot in Bali, or, a few people in Korea, or some in San Diego that I saw that were interest-based co-living, right? But in order to scale that, I think it's going to require some kind of more brand-centered and kind of potentially impact investors as well. So more triple bottom line. That's not just the stripped down version. How many people can we fit in the building? So that we can maximize our financial returns, right? But I think one of the really, really nice things is that as you look at large real estate, kind of investors and Blackstone and BlackRock and, a lot of these kind of larger groups, they're not just investing in buildings because they're profitable. They're saying we are no longer going like this ESG kind of wave is real. And it's extremely exciting, especially for co-living, as we look at, all of the environmental benefits from saving, energy costs from shared resources. And, there's just so many elements. And then the like social elements as well, right? And so I think one of the most important things to get to that promised land, if you will, right, Mark, where we do have a scalable co-living model, but that also focuses on the community. In order to get there, we're going to have to measure our social and environmental impacts, and we're going to need to get better at it. One of my good friends, Matt Lesniak, and Penny Clark over at Conscious Co-Living, they have done a lot of research. Penny actually just released her thesis that she did for 4 years writing on the environmental and social impacts of shared living models. And so there's a lot of people that are starting to look into this, starting to measure it, but we need to measure it for two main purposes. One is for, social impact investors. So people that today are looking at investing in, things that are better for the environment and better for people, right? So we need to do a good job at measuring this. And then the second element is folks that aren't specifically social impact investors, but maybe it's this year, maybe it's 2 years from now, maybe it's 5 years from now, but they're eventually going to have to start measuring their carbon footprint. Like New York, for example, just passed a lot of laws that will come into effect by 2025 and 2030, where buildings have to run at a certain energy efficiency, or there's massive taxes to kind of offset the like carbon footprint. So whether real estate investors want to or not, they're going to have to start doing it. So I think that the co-living industry can get ahead of this by starting to measure it, by starting to say, hey guys, look, here's the amount of CO2 or the kind of amount of environmental, benefits that we brought to the world over the past year. And so I think to kind of, and per usual, I kind of meander in my answer to the question, but to bring it back to the central point, I think in order to get to a point where we do have a marriage of the community-driven co-living model and the kind of financial profitability, I think part of that bridge to measure it, or to kind of build that bridge, will be measuring a lot of the social and environmental impacts, because investors and developers, real estate developers, are already starting, and they're only going to become more kind of attuned to the environmental, the social, and the government aspects of a lot of their real estate investments. So I'm hoping that as we measure this more, as there's more of a focus on, okay, how does this building perform versus this building, we can really start to have more of a magnifying glass on the co-living industry, and a lot of these underlying elements that are better for people, better for the world, will really rise to the top, and hopefully see co-living take off even more, and hopefully in a model that is both financially profitable and scalable, but also community driven.
Interesting. And I think it's quite a challenge. And I see if you're measuring on the social side, on social involvement, to appeal to that group. Some of that is qualitative and it's not quantitative. You know, how many friends did you make in the co-living community? How many deep conversations did you have? You know, a lot of that's just not going to be measurable for anybody. But I get it.
And yeah,
You know, here's
and
go
er,
go ahead.
oh yeah, I was just going to say quickly on that one, Mark. There actually are a few companies out there that are actually starting to do this. So Zen Co-living, which I think has recently kind of shifted their model, but they were out of Israel. They were actually backed by impact investing fund, but they actually did start to measure this. So they released a report every 6 months, and they would ask they would ask the residents through a survey when they came in a list of 20 questions that would say, how often do you feel lonely? You know, how many good friends in the city would you say you have? And then 6 months after they moved in, they would have them take that exact same survey, right? So some of this is going to be tough to measure, and it's like if I have a great conversation with you, and the next day I feel more empowered and I'm certainly excited about it, that's tough to measure, right? But when I move into a co-living, how often I feel lonely, how many great friends I think I have, how much I feel like I belong or whatever. Some of these things, while I totally agree, are going to be difficult to measure. We must, as an industry, find ways to measure them, whether it's through surveys or other kind of elements, because co-living does have all these benefits that, besides putting it in a slide deck and saying, look, people are making friends, we have to have a quantitative way to measure it and to communicate it. And I think through surveys or other kind of elements, there will be ways to do it. But I agree. Some of the other more kind of qualitative elements, we might have to get a little bit more creative on to kind of show people the value in that, because there is so much value for folks like me and you that have seen it. And I think that we really need a way to communicate that, and hopefully we'll come up with better and better ways to measure it.
Yep. And by the way, as soon as we finish, while it's still fresh in your mind, if you'll jot down a list of those resources that you're mentioning, Penny's study, your article, your friend's book, or G's book,
absolutely,
send it to us, and we'll be sure to put it in the show notes.
Excellent.
So let's see. Here's something I want to test out on you, and this came up during one of the podcasts. And this is from the point of view of co-living advocates, operators. Let's leave the investors behind for a moment. I'm wondering, there's this explosion of interest in co-living, and we see it in CoLive. And let's give CoLive a plug. CoLive.org is an international organization that brings people of all interests in co-living together. And we just had a program from Africa and the Nordics. And I mean, this is exploding everywhere. It's been going on in Bali for a long time, but it's in India. There was a program recently, and I speak with someone from there. And that's more about almost warehousing individuals. It's all about, anyway. But here's what I'm wondering. If this explosion in co-living, and I think it's clear that it's happening, it's been happening for about the last 3 to 5 years, give or take. I wonder if it is linked to our belief that global warming, if global warming and the sensitivity to it is at a root of this, where we're thinking about sustainability and energy use and that sort of thing. And I think the pandemic might play into this as well, that with the very actually probable extinction of human life and of life within your lifetime, probably not mine, but within your lifetime, if that is leading us to some values, or a significant block of people to some values about the value of life, the value of relationships, the value of family, the value of communication, and then put in the environmental aspect of sustainability, if that might be a spark, if not the spark, that's leading those of us who are enthused about this to get off our asses and try to get this moving. And it really never occurred to me. I never made the possible connection before. And maybe I haven't heard it discussed in our co-living groups, but what do you think? Do you think an awareness of these factors rooted in global warming might have something to do with this explosion of interest in co-living?
It's a really good question there, Mark. And I agree, this isn't something that has kind of got brought up on the various co-live calls I've been on. But I think one it's very interesting, right? I think, as I was mentioning earlier, there's a lot of these environmental aspects that gets talked about, right? Like, what are we building our buildings out of? Where are we getting the energy for the buildings? You know, how efficient is a co-living dorm that's, or co-living room that's, 6 bedrooms versus a traditional, one that's like 1 and 2 bedrooms. Well, we can fit more people, so therefore use less resources. And that gets talked about a lot, right? But I think the element that you touched on, Mark, about how, well, maybe this is an impetus to saying, hey, wait a minute, people want to live in a different way now because look at what we're doing to the planet, right? And so I think that for some element, I would agree. I think when I'm looking at kind of the like spark, if you will, of co-living, and it's impossible to bring it down to one thing, but I think one of the main issues that I look at is the social impact, right? Or the social element, right? Where it's these things nowadays are smartphones, right? Kind of they brought us together in a lot of ways, but they also brought us apart in a lot of ways, right? And I think that kind of living through screens increasingly has this kind of not even underground anymore. People are yearning for face-to-face interaction, certainly post-pandemic, right? Where it's like, hey, wait a minute, there's this magical element when you get people together face-to-face, right? So I think that element is certainly one of the main sparks of the co-living movement in general, is people wanting to connect on a more meaningful basis and more face-to-face. But I think I'd be remiss if we left out the climate change environmental aspect, right? And so I think that, to your point, it's certainly part of this, a lot of folks, as more and more info and more data and more climate talks that, don't go well. And for some reason, the world can't get together and be like, hey, we should probably stop doing some of this stuff. I think that a lot of individuals are starting to kind of take it on themselves, right? And say, okay, wait a minute, if we really want to make an impact here and live in a way that's better for the environment, better for the future of our species, for the future of the planet, that a lot of these elements of co-living can certainly help. And I would also say that, if you look at some of the earlier versions of co-living, if you will, if you look at co-ops, over in Scandinavia, there were kind of these places in Denmark and kibbutz and Israel as well, these kind of self-sustained communities that are saying, hey, we're going to get together and live in a way that's way more, harmonious with the environment than the, massive, manufactured agriculturing or agriculture that we have today. And it's saying, hey, let's have our own farm. There's a lot of co-living places or hacker houses in San Francisco that have their, kind of compost, place in the backyard and other elements of that. So I would totally agree that, at least for a lot of folks, maybe not for everybody, but for a lot of people interested in co-living, certainly there's an element of how can we live, not only better socially, but how can we live in a better way that's more harmonious with nature? And I think that, as time goes on, it would not appear that the climate situation is going to get better before it gets worse. And so I think that, as I mentioned before, hopefully more and more folks start to turn to more, environmentally friendly, resource sharing, kind of community driven living scenarios like a lot of co-living models. And so if somebody takes it, next year and they do a totally new thing that's not co-living, but is, more attuned to the environment, sign me up. I'm ready to be all behind it. But I think that we'll start to see more and more in those, Mark, as we see more people like you were mentioning that are saying, wait a minute, we need to live in a better way, especially with all of this, not so great news about the climate kind of hitting our headlines basically every day nowadays.
I'd like to take the opportunity to share some initiatives that we have going on at Thrive this year, so you can help spread the word. And
absolutely.
And just to, I really haven't announced it yet, so I'll share it with you and
seeing behind the scenes. I love it.
And the audience. First of all, regarding programming, we have been doing this podcast every other week and putting it out every other week, and we're getting a good response. We've got several prongs, and we've actually started naming each one individually. So we've got some that's about co-living, where you and I like this, where we're really digging into co-living. Jonathan Anderson comes on regularly. The last time he and I talked, he was out taking a walk, and we did a podcast with him taking a walk in the park. Then we have some business people, coaches, people doing all types of things, and we interview them to dig into a financial advisor and how do you work with people and how do people approach financial advising. And anyway, so we've got that category, Thrive Business. And then we've got one that we call Thrive Passion, and people that are really passionate. I did one that we haven't produced yet on Tesla, giving a bull case for Tesla. We've got somebody that's really enthused about cryptocurrency. We've got a former CIA agent who was the past director of the CIA's Office of Cybersecurity. And she did a really interesting podcast. And we've talked several times about world events as they're unfolding. And she gives the rest of the story about what's been going on historically. Anyway, so we're doing some really interesting things to educate our audience. And one of the things that I think communities are looking for is to do more programming. So what we're going to do, starting very shortly, and I'm sorry that we didn't have time to do this for you, is to open up these podcasts to co-living communities to be able to not only watch them recorded, but to participate in the discussion and help me interview people, whether it's business people, that are passionate about things. Because I think one of the qualities that we who are enthused about co-living and living in co-living communities share is a thirst for knowledge and just a desire to learn about everything that we can. I'm so passionate and enthused about so many things that are going on in the technology revolution. We thought that iPhones, the era of iPhones was exciting, but we're launching it this decade into areas that we never could have conceived of. So anyway, so we're going to make those available, and we're going to record these at noon Eastern in the States, so that the co-living communities, the ones that seem to be most active, at least from co-live, seem to be in Europe, so a little later time zone than we are in, and be able to bring them in to put Zoom up on a big screen and participate. So that's one thing that we're doing, and we're going to focus about 1 out of every 5 on a co-living topic to bring in the co-live folks. And one of the topics that we're working on that I haven't heard discussed is sex in co-living. What's the impact? What's the what is the positive potential? What's the negative potential? And would love to have a discussion involving some co-living communities around that topic. We're going to bring in a male and female to talk about that from both perspectives. So that's one thing that we're planning on doing. Another one is, and I don't know if I shared this with you or not, but my background professionally has been solar energy, and then mediation, and later technology and marketing. So I train people internationally, mediation groups, on how to mediate disputes. I wrote a book on mediation, a how-to on mediation. I don't talk about myself very often, but I even mediated the first cases on national TV in the US on the Oprah Winfrey Show. That was back in '96.
There you go.
So an infamous claim to fame, actually 2 criminal cases mediated, not live, but recorded on her show. Anyway, so one of the things that I have picked up from our webinars at CoLive is that conflict is a significant issue in co-living. It's just going to be.
It's inevitable. People are people.
3 people, 5 people, 10 people, however.
You're going to have it.
So beginning in probably the beginning of the second quarter, we're going to host mediation training for co-living operators, enthusiasts, residents, and we can do it on Zoom so that we can have people from really all over the world participating. We're going to charge $100 for the training. It'll be a day and a half, and we'll do probably do them quarterly. And since I mediated all types of things, including on the Oprah Winfrey Show, we'll offer to mediate disputes that are at a high level: sexual harassment, significant community disputes that threaten to break up the community. So I'll also offer to mediate those. And all of the proceeds from these trainings will go towards Thrive co-living initiatives. Then the last thing, and I know I'm not giving you a chance to respond to these things, even to give a thumbs up, but
no. 2 thumbs up to all of it, Mark. No, yeah, as always, fan number 1 of all that you're doing. So no, please continue.
So the last one is, and I and several others have really buckled down during the holidays, and we're developing a template, if you will, an ideal, in our opinion, ideal version of what co-living can be, from decision-making to mediation to skill sharing to tool sharing. And we're putting together an outline that we'll put out on our website, open source, so that if there are any ideas that people can pick and choose and use, great.
I love it.
And if anybody can put it together in a way that we can't, fine too. So we're going to put it out there, as well as a physical layout that we think is ideal, at least as a beginning, to have a model out there that could be replicated anywhere, and a starting point. Every community, no matter how they're established, whether it be self-funded from a group of co-housing enthusiasts or through investors, they all need a framework. So we're going to just advance a framework for consideration, that involves everything that we can think of.
Excellent. Excellent. No, through the Co-Live Summit last year, was able to, host a few panels with some, public policy folks, and we had an architecture section on kind of, okay, what are these designs going to look like? How do they fit the laws in India versus New York versus Sydney, Australia? And I just find it all totally, totally fascinating. And I think one of the best things about the co-living larger global industry has been everyone's, almost unsurprisingly, willingness to share with the community, right? It's kind of like, hey, I've got some ideas, let's put them out there, react to it, build on it, but let's kind of have a rising tide for everybody. So love all those initiatives, Mark, and we'll certainly look forward to taking a look at them all.
Awesome. And let me just mention one other factor that's a big part, the residential part of this template is Boxable. boxabl.com, if some are not familiar with it. And it's a tiny house, 400 square foot platform that can be the basis for, and they'll build other residential components, bedrooms, other components to add on. So it's energy efficient. Are you familiar with Boxable?
I haven't specifically heard of Boxable, but I've heard of some other kind of like modular constructing stuff, and I haven't dove deep into it, but I find it fascinating. And I think if someone can crack the code, it could be pretty transformational.
Well, Boxable starts, it has a 20 by 20 foot footprint, but it collapses in itself to become an 8 foot by 20 foot footprint that's then opened up and expanded on site. So it doesn't have wide load restrictions on the highway. It can be pulled by a future Cybertruck, probably pretty damn slowly, and then installed on site in a day. And each basic unit, the first one that they're creating is a casita, the 20 by 20, and it's $50,000 dropped on the site. So very affordable, and we think could be the building block, and we'll present it as a building block for the residential component. Some benefits there, that it's affordable, and some, there's definitely some interest in affordability, but some of these, like our previous concept with a big box store, was not really that affordable. So this is so affordable that you could test it out. If you didn't like the community, we hope to have communities in lots of different areas of the country. You could pick it up and move it to another Thrive community, or if you just didn't like the concept, you could just take your football and go home. Pick up your Boxable and take it out.
I love
it. So it cuts down on some of the risk that people will feel inevitably in joining a community. So
sure. Wow.
That's what we have up our sleeve for this year, and I appreciate being able to share it with you.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, it sounds like you've got a big 2022 on the books, but wouldn't expect anything different. So very excited, as I said, to stay up to date on it all, and hopefully make it up to St. Pete's at some point, so I can see it all in action. That's the hope.
Great. Well, let's not let the opportunity go by for you to share any other things that you're enthused about, announcements you'd like to make, anything that you want to plug. Do give us your contact information, and we'll put that in the show notes too. But help us wrap up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think. Yeah, 2022 should be a fun one. Yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of new initiatives going on at Co-Live. Like a lot going on at Nomos Group, and then just kind of exploring Miami is another element of what I'm hoping to do. Kind of see the different co-living initiatives down here, and hopefully bring some of it to my new backyard. So, but I think luckily was able to go ahead and plug some of my good friends and co-live contacts throughout the show, but I will totally make sure to provide you with some links to all of that, so that if folks want to learn more, they can.
And what's your blog? Give us that.
Yes, it's Co-Living Corner is the one. So just Co-Living Corner, no dashes or anything, .com, and I'll make sure to toss that in the links as well.
Is that the best way to contact you, or do you want to give your email address too?
I think so. Yeah, actually, probably email address these days. So just Connor at nomosgroup.com, or sorry, .co. That was close.
Spell that.
So
Spell it.
CONNOR at NOMOS group.co.
.co, not com. Okay.
Yes, yeah, .co. That's right. So if anyone wants to reach out, as you can probably tell, I love talking about co-living, or kind of anything about new ways to live. And so always happy to make new connections.
And do you have the ability to do some consulting for others other than the group you're working with?
Absolutely. Always looking to kind of hear from folks that are looking to either launch new brands or launch new concepts, and whether it's actually paid consulting or just kind of an hour-long call, and I can send some links your way, or kind of make some introductions. Always happy, as most folks are in the co-living industry, to help out in any way that I can.
We really are a good bunch,
I think so. No, I mean, I obviously don't have a very long working career, but yeah, I think every once in a while we have to pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, good work, co-living folks so far. Let's keep it up out there.
real collaborative group, I find.
100%.
Well, let's keep these conversations going. At least once a quarter, we need to catch up and see what's going on. So glad to have you back. Glad you're in my neck of the woods. Even if you get close, Naples or something, we can meet in person.
Absolutely. So maybe our next YouTube podcast will be in person. Who knows? Over coffee. We'll see.
Good. Well, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully you got some good meaty discussion here. And I always enjoy talking with you, Connor. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark. Chat next time.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. To learn more about our mission and how you can support our vision of creating co-living communities worldwide, please visit us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. To receive advanced viewings of our podcast and other exclusive content, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Thrive Co-Living Communities. You can also learn more ways to support our mission in the show notes below. Amazon Smile, GoFundMe, Kroger, and our own Thrive Gear store, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, and many other items. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.